Okay, everybody. I'm here today with my friend and former colleague Kirsten Hart in Los Angeles. Hey, Kirsten and I used to work together at Kaplan International in Los Angeles. This is a couple years ago. So, Kirsten, tell us a little bit about yourself. How long have you been teaching English, for example?
Yeah, so I've been teaching a total for 6 years now. Basically, I started teaching when I was in college, when I was getting my TESOL minor. And actually, that was a really interesting teaching experience. I was working at a elementary school with the ESL students. There was a Chinese boy that I was tutoring, and then I also worked at an adult learning center there,
Hmm.
so continuing education. And it was a lot of people that were working at this foundry, metal foundry, because
Hmm.
that was in Indiana. That's where I'm from.
Mhm.
So it was an interesting mix of people. And then after that, I moved to San Francisco and then LA. And in LA, I started doing a summer camp called Embassy Summer. And we had students, mostly teenagers from all over the world, and I helped teach them. And then I started at Kaplan and I was working there for about 3 years. And it's a long history, but now I'm teaching online independently. And so I have my own students that I'm teaching one-on-one
Mhm.
through Zoom, actually, and I really like it.
I see.
So,
I
mhm.
see. Okay, yeah. All right. Well, of course, so of course I'm teaching here in Uruguay in Montevideo, and you're still in Los Angeles. But
Yeah.
most of the students you teach are from where, or can you say?
Well, actually, now I have mostly Japanese students. That just
Mhm.
happened to be how it went. It was word of
Mhm.
mouth, and friends asked their friends. So I have mostly Japanese students, but I also have a student from Chile, a couple Chinese students too
Yeah,
right
yeah.
now. Yeah.
So, it's interesting. I think that after a while, when you teach, you notice certain patterns with
Yes.
certain students. And you remember at Kaplan, I used to always talk about how with the French-speaking students, I could sort of see the mistakes coming.
Right.
And because obviously you speak one language, and that has as means you have something in common with a lot of other speakers of that same language. So,
Right. When you start learning a language, you start to see those mistakes and why they make those mistakes.
right,
Their
right.
mother tongue. Hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just thought we could talk a little bit about some of those things today. I mean, I'll mention that, I've always been noticing that Spanish speakers have trouble saying Spain, all right? And
Yeah.
and it isn't the word Spain itself. It's that combination of SP and ST at the beginning of the word that is just really, really hard for them to wrap their heads around, because in their own language that just really doesn't exist. So, and especially a word like Spain. So it's very hard for a Spanish speaker not to have in their head, okay, it's España.
Oh,
So it
right.
comes out of their mouth in English, es Spain.
Yeah.
And
Where
it's
are you
es
from? Say,
sports. Yeah, yeah.
right.
I'm from Spain. And that's why, when you hear that, that's where it comes from. It's just a series of sound combinations that don't exist.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that it's because they don't have that S sound if it's the beginning of the sentence.
Mhm.
They never have an E first. Or sorry, they always have an E.
Right.
So yeah, they never just start with S. So it's
Yeah.
really hard to train your mouth and your brain to do that for Spanish speakers.
Right. S either has a vowel before it or a vowel after it. So you'll have a word like aspiradora,
Mhm.
ASP, which literally it means vacuum cleaner. That can work. But yes, Spanish speakers can't say Spain. It's one of the funniest things I've noticed.
Yeah.
Um, I've also noticed, for example, and this Spanish has in common with French, is that they'll use the word make rather than do.
Mhm.
And they'll use the verb to have rather than the verb to be. For example, I have 30 years I have 30 years, not I am 30, you know.
I think,
So,
and
yeah,
that's the biggest one that we'll hear, I think.
yeah,
Right. And because that's part of introducing yourself.
right,
And so,
right,
yeah.
right.
Or
So,
I'll hear sometimes, like in our family, if we're talking about our family, we
mhm,
say there are 5 people.
yeah.
And then in Spanish, they'll say like we have 5. It sounds a little different. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I mean that's one that as a teacher I might just let go,
Yeah.
because all right, you know, there are 5 of us in the family. We have 5 people in our family. Okay, you
It's
know,
not
it
necessarily
works.
incorrect. There's
So,
just
yeah,
different ways to say it.
so yes, yes,
And like make a bed or set
yes,
the table.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, never mind. I mean, those things that where you just get so idiomatic that you know, when you try and explain to a student, make a bed. Am I making a bed? You know, taking a hammer and nails? No,
It's not.
it's just and that's where I have. I mean, with my students who are mostly adults, they just want the answer. You
Yeah.
know, so I can just say, remember, it's make a bed. That's all. Just don't think about why and how and all that.
Yeah. Sometimes you really, sometimes it's good to know the why and how, but sometimes it's just going to confuse you more if you really think about it deeply. And sometimes there's no
Hmm.
reason, right?
Right.
So,
Right, right. You know,
was
and
there any?
I can remember some of the Japanese students, especially at Kaplan, always used to want to know the why and how.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess that's a cultural thing.
It's a
Um,
very, yeah, they're a very logical brained society, I think, compared to
yes,
perhaps Latin America or especially Americans. So, yeah, they want to
exactly,
know. They want to know the process usually. Um,
exactly. So,
yeah, so I guess I can talk a little bit about some pronunciation with Japanese students that I've noticed. Of course, I think that the biggest one that teachers first notice with Japanese students and just Asian students in general is the L and R sound,
mm,
because those languages they don't distinguish. There isn't a necessarily an R. I guess it's more like there's no R sound in the Japanese language, and I learned this when I started speaking Japanese and learning the
mm,
alphabet system. And they have an L sound, but it's a little different than our L sound. So it's a little bit like in between L and R. So it's really
mm,
hard to even hear the difference, let alone try to speak the difference.
mm.
So that's something that when I have Japanese students, I really try to practice with them. Like sometimes we'll read these words out loud, or we'll play games where, like for example, I'll have like I'll try to have words that sound the same, but they'll have an L instead of an R, and then we say both of those words and try to like get the difference. It's really hard, and it's all about the tongue, right? Like what you're doing with your tongue. So that's
Mm-hmm.
something that I've noticed, and I guess that would be the very first thing. Were there any other sounds that you've noticed that are hard for Spanish speakers?
You know, I don't think there's a sound that is hard. Maybe the TH here.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, you know, now, of course, this is where Spanish just gets different, where Spanish is spoken in so many countries. So, for example, you have in Spain, so the C sound is very often pronounced like a TH. I mean, the classic is it's not Barcelona, it's Barcelona.
Yeah,
Um,
right. So it depends on what country, like the way there's so many different accents in the Spanish language, more than I guess English.
you
So
know, I think my students here would say that English is probably worse
hmm,
in terms of the variety of accents. One of the things I hear a lot, and I have to work with some of my students who are international business people, that they have to um, navigate, you know, an American standard like yours and mine, and then
yeah,
they'll have to speak to someone from the South, um,
that's true,
and
I guess. Within
you know,
America,
and
there's so
yeah,
many.
right, right.
Yeah,
And if they're simply not used to accents, they freeze. I have someone now who has to deal with a fast talking New York advertising person,
That's right.
and she struggles. Her English is fine, but she just struggles with the fast talking New Yorker
Yeah.
who can't pronounce the letter R to save their lives, right? So
Right.
struggle. It's a struggle.
What would you say is the most typical American accent, or the easiest, the universal American accent, maybe I should say? What would you say?
Well, they really want they want everyone to sound, to be honest, Kirsten, like you and I do. Um,
California?
that's very, very neutral. It's one of the reasons why I think Canadian English teachers do very well.
Yeah.
Because it's probably the most neutral.
It's slow. We tend to speak slow. I've heard from some linguists that the Midwest accent is the typical American accent, and until you get up into Wisconsin and Michigan, but like that Midwest, like North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, Indiana, Ohio accent is supposed to be the standard. But I would say that California doesn't sound that much different. Coming from the Midwest myself and then moving to California, I don't think that people thought I had an accent at all. I blended in. Do you think that when you moved from New York, you had to change the way you speak, or did you change the way you speak?
I probably did, without realizing it, mainly because people after a while started telling me that I sounded like I was from California, and yes, but it is a struggle, and I mean I have a couple of videos that I play of different accents from around Britain and Ireland.
Oh, yeah.
And my students are just lost, so they just lost.
Different.
So
I think it's about the teacher that you had when you first started learning English. That's the base that you have.
yeah.
So I guess another thing I was gonna back to about the Japanese people. I think that Japanese students also, I've really noticed it's ER and AR. There's no distinguish. So like I have a Japanese friend who always tries to order Earl Grey tea.
Okay.
Yeah, and so, but he's ordering Arl Grey, Arl, the AR sound, Arl Grey, and then nobody can understand. So that AR sound is really difficult. Like instead of Earth, a Japanese person might want to say Arth. Yeah, so it's really difficult, and even it'll be switched. Like shark can turn into shirk. So you have to really try to hear and practice that difference with your mouth.
Yes. I did that this morning with O and U, and of course, trying to do it on Zoom. It's comic enough when you're in front of someone, but when you're on,
you get your mouth close to the screen so they can see what you're doing with your mouth. And
it's I get closer, but not so intimate. Yes. So
I usually try to draw a picture of like, this is the roof of the mouth and this is where the tongue should be. That tends to help students. And then if you can see from this part without, if it's a non-tongue sound, like ER, then I can, help them like R, you're going to drop your jaw for AR more. ER is kind of keeping this general jaw motion. Yeah, it's funny that we don't even think that we have to start changing your mouth when you're speaking another language. So
well, I think it is interesting is that in another era, I briefly took a course in Cantonese because I thought I might have an assignment in Hong Kong, and I didn't in the end, so I dropped it. But I would leave that class feeling the strain in my throat and vocal cords because I was making sounds that just didn't exist in English and the other Western languages that I speak.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
absolutely is an exercise for your mouth and your tongue and everything, and sometimes your throat if it's a more vocal language like that.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So what? So how about any grammar? Is there any other grammar that you notice uh, with Spanish speakers that's difficult to teach, or that you see mistakes more?
Well, I mean, I find, and this is probably a matter of writing style as much as grammar, but when people get into the passive voice here, sentences start to just get enormously, run on, and uh,
And that's
so
okay in the Spanish language.
it's fine, but of course, in English, a sentence isn't supposed to be a paragraph,
Right.
and so then when it's for some people, of course they're very, and this is natural, right, that people get possessive about their writing,
Hmm.
where you try to say, okay, this sentence has actually three subjects, so let's turn it into three sentences. No, it's all one subject. And then okay, I have a negotiation ahead of me. So yeah.
And it's just trying to separate those ideas. Like,
Yes.
can this be separated into two sentences? Where are we drawing that line, right?
Right.
And I've
Right.
noticed that with Spanish speaking students too, is like, okay, how many ideas do you have in this like long sentence that could be a paragraph? How many
Mm.
separate ideas, and how are we going to separate those ideas to make it English appropriate?
Mm-hmm. And how about with students from Japan? What type of problems do you find there with some writing skills?
With writing, I mean, it tends to be really short. And I think that that's because the way that English is taught in Japan is
Mm,
very like drill based. So they're going to learn the grammar, they're going to learn the vocabulary, but it's very much memorization, and there's
mm,
not a lot of production. So maybe writing and speaking isn't done very much. So they can get the right grammar, but to make it into a longer sentences, like for example, using noun phrases like the man who was walking, that's kind of hard to add in that extra information. It's
mhm,
going to sound like very choppy and basic. And then another thing is format. This is a little bit, it's, I guess, could be nitpicky, but if you're in college or some kind of academic or professional setting, it definitely comes into play. But I notice that the way the Japanese people usually write sentences is like very separated. Like they'll have a sentence and then make a new line.
I remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
So instead of just like when that sentence ends, you start the next sentence right after, it'll be like period, next line, period, next line, which looks weird when you're writing an email and
Mhm,
an essay. So that's something that I've had to try to train Japanese students not to do when they're physically writing. Well, even
mhm,
in typed out text, it'll
mhm.
sometimes be like that. So yeah, that's definitely one of the things I've noticed too.
Right.
So yeah, it's interesting what different countries do. And then teaching at Kaplan, I started to notice handwriting too. I could tell what country people are from by their handwriting. So that was
Wasn't that
interesting.
the case? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I think
that's
Spanish speakers tended to write very similar to the way that we do, but
right. Right. But I think that where they came from a place that obviously used a different alphabet, which is
yes.
let's face it, most of the countries on the planet.
Yeah.
Like I can remember Russian students had very similar penmanship.
Hmm. A
And
lot of
yeah.
Russians would tend to do like a cursive, and same with Brazilians, I noticed.
Mm,
Yeah, they would loop their letters more, and maybe that's just how they were taught in school. Yeah, so it's interesting.
yeah.
And then if
Yeah.
it like Japanese is very like straight lines. Yeah.
Sure. Sure. So.
So
All
yeah,
right.
it's
Well, here we have it. All the things they don't teach you when you're getting your English teacher training. So.
yeah, and that's something that I just had to learn from experience. You know, we learn how to make lesson plans. We learn how to maybe manage a classroom, how to teach grammar. But yeah, you don't learn about those nuances. And if you're teaching more one-on-one or specifically for a certain country, it's really good to know that stuff.
Right.
So you can properly help your student. Because for example, if I think that Japanese people are going to have that ES sound complication, and I try to do a pronunciation lesson, they're like, no, this is easy for us. Let's move on. So
Right.
it really is important to know what pronunciation is difficult, writing styles, grammar. Yeah.
Okay.
I could go on, there's more, but maybe
Right.
that's for another video.
That's it, you know. So yes, I mean, we'll let's do some more of these videos and tell our stories. I think can be useful at a number of levels. First, for other teachers out there who um, might be sticking their toe in the water of teaching internationally the way we do, and also I think it can be very important for native speakers
Right.
who interact with language learners,
Absolutely.
and you know, to have a bit more empathy, frankly,
Patient.
with the
You have to
person,
be patient.
and you know, patience, absolutely. So
Yeah, definitely. So this kind of video can be for everybody. And if you're
absolutely,
learning English and watching this, it's good to listening practice.
yes, yes, and you'll know as a learner you're not alone. So
Exactly.
right.
Um, I'm learning two languages myself, and it's a struggle. I get it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, as a people like us, I mean, you know, I'm now, at the moment I step outside my front door, I'm living another language, and people here have been very patient with me. So I
Yeah,
think we all owe that to be to pay that forward.
definitely.
All right.
And that's something, we learn as a teacher too, just to listen to your students and be more patient with them.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, well,
Thanks a lot, Kirsten. This was
yeah,
fun.
no problem. This
Okay,
was
let's
fun.
do this again.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll see more of me in the future.
All right.
All right. Stop the recording.